Often quoted as the best tycoon simulation video game to be released, the RollerCoaster Tycoon franchise has grown into one of the most well-known series worldwide. Developed independently by Chris Sawyer, often quoted a genius behind video games, RollerCoaster Tycoon launched off the starting station with a big reputation and legacy, until Atari decided to crash it by not finishing the track. With continuous acquisitions, lawsuits and bankruptcies, Atari splashed too hard. Behind these reasons, it ultimately results in games missing the mark, leaving them with a bad reputation within the video game industry. We'll explore the RollerCoaster Tycoon franchise and understand how corporate greed and the fumble in handling from Atari decided to leave the franchise incomplete. Chris Sawyer, an independent game developer based in the United Kingdom, started in the video game industry by porting Enigma games such as Elite Plus, Frontier Elite 2, Birds of Prey, and Dino Dinny's Goal to the personal computer, or PC. He decided to start developing his own games, and his first independent game was Transport Tycoon, released in 1994, focusing on basic forms of transportation, such as buses and trains, to populate towns between locales, showcasing the industrialization of countries and small cities. Once he was happy with the game and its expansions, he started working on a sequel. During this time he got passionate about roller coasters, and ended up making RollerCoaster Tycoon instead, released in 1999. The game ran on nearly all modern hardware at the time, and had very few bugs throughout the game. This allowed RollerCoaster Tycoon to be a successful development for Chris and for Hasbro Entertainment, who published the game. As Chris recollects with Eurogamer that the publisher, being Hasbro Entertainment, didn't realise the potential long-term value of the IP at the time. In fact, none of us did. It seemed like a risky game with a niche audience, which was going to be challenging to market. However, a widespread marketing campaign was produced for the game. It was even included in gaming magazines and cereal boxes, increasing the popularity of the game. Chris later went on to develop 2 expansion packs for RollerCoaster Tycoon, being released in 1999 and 2000 respectively. Due to the success that RollerCoaster Tycoon had, Chris decided to take a break from the franchise and go back to develop a sequel for Transport Tycoon. He wrote a new engine, but felt it was going to fit better for RollerCoaster Tycoon, so Chris decided to develop RollerCoaster Tycoon 2 instead. If you've played the sequel, you know nearly all the features carry over from the first game, but with more rides, campaigns, and of course, roller coasters. Now, this is where changes within the development and publishing start to occur. While Chris was developing RollerCoaster Tycoon 2, Hasbro Entertainment was bought out by Infogrames, so the publishing rights were now Infogrames, but were still being developed solely by Chris. Once RollerCoaster Tycoon 2 released, Frontier Developments, a contractor of Infogrames at the time, came in and developed 2 expansion packs for RollerCoaster Tycoon 2, being Time Twister and Wacky Worlds, since Chris went back to work on his Transport Tycoon sequel. Infogrames was a company that grew solely by acquiring a good deal of other publishing and video game companies. In 2001 they purchased Atari, and in 2003 they rebranded the company to use the Atari brand name, while still using Infogrames as an internal publishing and for previous license deals. During the rebranding, they kept all the original companies and intellectual properties, as Infogrames believed that no one within the public eye or video game industry, as an end consumer, would notice anything different about Atari, yet they were completely bought out by Infogrames. With the success of Chris's first solo developed games being Transport Tycoon, RollerCoaster Tycoon, and the just released RollerCoaster Tycoon 2, they raked in a total of $180 million profit in 2003, and when adjusting for inflation, is around $309 million in 2024. In 2003, Atari received a review from Chris to investigate the correct amount of sales and royalties, as Chris stated that Atari wrongfully kept 10% from the total sales, which Atari denies doing. Chris believed that they withheld around $4.8 million, which is roughly $8.2 million in 2024. The total sales period was between 1999 and 2003, which Chris wanted to review, but Atari refused to cooperate, and thus in 2005, Chris decided to pursue Atari with a lawsuit. Chris and his team alleged that Atari had breached the licensing agreement by not allowing his auditors to access the accounts from 1999 to 2001, with Chris only receiving around 30 million, which is roughly 51 million today, and stated that this figure fell short of what was meant to be delivered. Chris mentioned that his forensic accountants had discovered 13 instances of payments that were wrongfully withheld. In an interview with Eurogamer, Chris mentioned that he copyrighted the names and franchises he developed, continuing to say that I own the RollerCoaster Tycoon IP and trademarks, and the rights to create and market the new RollerCoaster Tycoon games are licensed to Atari Interactive, which is why he wasn't receiving the correct amount of payment for the license and each individual sale of his games, but was receiving a flat rate instead. Atari slowed the whole process down to make it a pain for Chris and his lawyers to make any progress. As Guy Herbert, a consultant for Marjack Micro, the team behind Chris's court case, said that, throughout this process, Atari Interactive has sought to delay the claims. Royalty queries were simply ignored, forced an audit. Non-cooperation with the audit forced Chris to sue. In some ways, larger part of the claim is just to get a court order for Atari to show the auditors the books. Guy continued with saying that the auditors sent over a list of objects they'd like to review, but by the due date nothing was ready, making it fall back on Atari. Guy finished by saying that the publisher Atari was very uncooperative. Atari pulled out every stop to force the case to be abandoned. Firstly, they countersued Chris, stating that he made Frontier Development, the developers behind the two expansions and RollerCoaster Tycoon 3, at the time of the court case was released, to develop a enhanced demo of RollerCoaster Tycoon 3 that would be sold to a third party, with Atari claiming that sources were calling it Thrills Game. This was partly true, as Frontier Development went on to develop a series of games called Thrillsville, published by LucasArts, and has very similar gameplay loop of a theme park designer and elements from the RollerCoaster Tycoon franchise. News outlets were conflicting each other on what the demo was, some stating that it was a demo of another game, an enhanced version of RollerCoaster Tycoon 3, or even a port of RollerCoaster Tycoon 2. As Frontier Development was roped into discussion, they came out and said that the demo was under strict conditions only to be a demonstration, and not related to the RollerCoaster Tycoon series or act as a sequel. Atari argued that granting Frontier to develop a demonstration version, Chris was enabling Frontier to sell its vision or next title within the RollerCoaster franchise to third parties, excluding Atari, resulting in a breach of contract between Chris, Atari, and Frontier. As the case went on, it is believed that Atari wanted to organise their files for the case, and proposed to have the location moved from the United Kingdom, where Chris is located, to the United States, stating that Atari had their important documents located within their office in New York, and believed the trial would be better located to benefit them. This was rejected by the judge, Justice Lawrence Collins, saying, "I am satisfied that the claimant, being Chris, has established that England is clearly the appropriate forum. I consider that Atari is playing tactical games." Atari continued to delay the case by basically just being lazy. To people's surprise, it worked for Atari, as the laws and agreements that were made with Chris and the original publishers had now expired since the court case was originally opened against Atari. Chris's original agreement with Microprose Limited at the time, which was bought by Hasbro Entertainment, and well, you know the rest of the story, but the agreement stated that the claimant, being Chris, was allowed to examine the accounts upon written request. When it came to the court case, the judge acknowledged the agreement between the two parties, but that it doesn't preclude the current proceedings. Throughout the case, Atari kept failing to deliver on what was required, such as the accounting books for Chris's auditing team to review, trying to put in a countersue by roping in Frontier Developments, and even trying to get the trial heard in New York. All attempts failed. Thus, the case was set to go to the High Court of England in 2008. Atari's request and counterclaim of Chris and Frontier Developments was rejected by the High Court, but Atari chose to keep the request within the Court of Appeal, hoping it would get a different response or decision. The Court of Appeal allowed part of Atari's agreement to persist within the case, but mentioned that under the current laws at the time, it would not be successful. The court mentioned that there is a possibility of the laws changing soon, which means Atari might have some hope between the request and hearing. Everything was at a standstill, as the case was set to go to the High Court in 2008. No new information about the case emerged, most likely being delayed by Atari again. It was announced in early 2008 that the case had been settled outside of court, with Chris and Atari reaching a settlement. The details of the settlement are confidential, even to this day, but Chris mentioned to Eurogamer about the case, saying that the dispute with Atari over royalty accounting that took several years of lawyers and distractions and costs before we reached a settlement, and sourced my whole view of the video game industry. Once Chris's lawsuit against Atari had ended, nothing was going on in the RollerCoaster Tycoon franchise. It sat there patiently awaiting its next entry. Atari did announce RollerCoaster Tycoon World, which released to negative reviews, to no one's surprise, as the game appeared and ran worse than RollerCoaster Tycoon 3 that was released in 2004. Part of the reason is that RollerCoaster Tycoon 3 was developed solely by Frontier Developments, with influence from Chris over the course of the development. With Chris's interview with Eurogamer, he said, "I was a consultant on the game during the development of RollerCoaster Tycoon 3 for the PC in 2003/2004. This allowed Frontier Developments to develop the game 3D without any influence from Atari or other publishers, which led to the game often being praised as a solid game, and the transition from a 2D environment into a 3D space, making it a fitting sequel for the RollerCoaster Tycoon franchise." After the release of RollerCoaster Tycoon 3, the agreement between Frontier and Atari was amended, for Atari to remain the publisher for 15 years, while Frontier to solely own the development rights. This is the most likely reason as to why Atari never touched RollerCoaster Tycoon 3, but released whatever games they wanted in relation to the franchise. In January 2013, Atari filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, which is a reorganization bankruptcy. Atari continued to operate as normal, but a plan is created to reorganize or restructure the company to leave bankruptcy and requires a court approval before borrowing money or leaving bankruptcy. Atari restructured and tried to sell off some of its IPs, including RollerCoaster Tycoon, for $3.5 million, but it failed to draw any serious bids. In December 2013, it was announced that Atari was given approval that its plan to leave bankruptcy was successful, less than 1 year of being in bankruptcy. Atari did manage to sell off some of its other IPs, but still had RollerCoaster Tycoon under its belt. While no public changes occurred, a lot of restructuring occurred internally, and from Atari's official annual financial report, there was some questions of whether the RollerCoaster Tycoon license is worth keeping. Frontier was nearing the end of their agreement with Atari and wanted to clean up their documents before they gained the full rights to RollerCoaster Tycoon 3. As I previously mentioned, this was within their amended agreement. However, Frontier came to the conclusion that they would not pay the correct amount of sales. In 2016, they requested an audit from Atari without submitting a court case, similar to what Chris did, but guess what? Atari decided against it. Frontier claimed that it was owed over $2.2 million in royalties from RollerCoaster Tycoon 3. Apparently, the contract between Frontier and Atari was amended in 2013 due to Atari's recent bankrupt news. And from Atari's financial reports in 2013, and from another site, which was discovered to be Steam Spy, revealed higher sales than originally thought by Frontier. Frontier worked out that they were only paid $1.1 million when they should have been paid $3.37 million, and thus requested an audit from Atari. Frontier's information relied heavily on the site Steam Spy. However, the disclaimer for the site mentions the following. Please note, Steam Spy extrapolates data from limited number of user profiles and thus isn't 100% correct. The judge for the case disregarded this as hard evidence, as it is based solely on Steam Spy, Atari, and from 2013 onwards, and was deemed that it was an extrapolation of sales that is overly conclusory and is not sufficiently reliable. CEO of Frontier, David Walsh, came out publicly in 2017 and said that, "We can confirm Frontier is currently pursuing a complaint against Atari. We have attempted to resolve the issue without legal action since April 2016. We have so far been denied our contractual right to audit by Atari, and we are unfortunately left with no other way to resolve our concerns. We are unable to offer any further comment while the matter is subject to due legal process." As the lawsuit went on, in May 2018, RollerCoaster Tycoon 3 was randomly removed from Steam and was no longer sellable on any storefronts. The exact reason at the time was unclear, as the lawsuit between Frontier and Atari just started to become more public within the gaming industry. News speculated around the lawsuit and the game's removal from storefronts. GOG came out and provided a statement on why the game was removed, stating that, "Due to expiring license rights, we were asked to remove the product from our catalogue for the time being. We'll be in talks with the new distribution rights holders to hopefully bring the game back as soon as possible." Nothing was said about the game's removal on Steam, or what would be next to the game, as it was no longer purchasable on any digital storefronts, meaning the only way to play the game was if you owned it originally, or on one of those old-fashioned CDs. With the rights up in the air, it was unclear who owned the rights while the court case was going on, as Frontier never came out and publicly stated they owned the rights from 2018 onwards. But from Atari's catalogue of IPs, in 2015 they mentioned the RollerCoaster Tycoon franchise, and said that the license extends until 2019, but no mention of RollerCoaster Tycoon 3, as the development rights are Frontier's while Atari published it. We had a period of no new information about the RollerCoaster Tycoon franchise or RollerCoaster Tycoon 3's abrupt removal, until randomly in 2020, Frontier announced that they'll be releasing an enhanced version of RollerCoaster Tycoon 3, with some upgraded textures, more resolution sizes, and support for more modern screens, labelled as a complete edition. And since Frontier developed and owned the game from Atari, they removed all of Atari's branding from the game, such as introduction logos, signs, and advertisements throughout the game. Well, most of the branding. And when Atari released their annual IP catalog in 2020, RollerCoaster Tycoon was no longer listed as an IP. Yet in 2019, Chris and Atari announced they've extended the license for another 3 years, up until 2022, with the CEO of Atari, Fred Chinesis, mentioning that, "We are excited to extend our long-term partnership with Chris Sawyer. RollerCoaster Tycoon has been a cornerstone of Atari's portfolio of games across multiple platforms, and moving forward, there will be more fun, engaging and enduring experiences to be added to the franchise." But, of course, there was no mention of the ongoing lawsuit between Atari and Frontier. Between 2020 and 2023, the court case between Frontier and Atari was resolved. No public documents exist or being reported that it was closed. The most plausible situation is that the case has been settled either within or outside of court, and the parties involved are no longer allowed to discuss the settlement of the case. This left Frontier with the full development and publishing rights to RollerCoaster Tycoon 3, and Atari with nothing. What is the future of the IP looking like? Well, it's unclear, but slightly promising. In March 2024, Frontier announced that it would be returning the publishing rights for RollerCoaster Tycoon 3 back to Atari. As Frontier released RollerCoaster Tycoon 3 Complete Edition, they published it across multiple platforms, such as the Nintendo Switch and Mac, which was not available on the initial release. Frontier announced on the London Stock Exchange that since they've released their version of RollerCoaster Tycoon 3, that it's reportedly generated a profit of $1.5 million United States dollar per year. So since 2020 and including 2024, generated $6 million in total so far. The total price for the publishing rights for RollerCoaster Tycoon 3 was $7 million United States dollar, with $4 million being upfront cash and $3 million being deferred cash, resulting in Atari owning the full publishing rights for all of the RollerCoaster Tycoon franchise. The series has had, and continues to have, a lot of unpopular and money-grabbing mobile games, such as RollerCoaster Tycoon Touch and 4, if you want to call it 4 other than an outrageous cash grabber, put in the original games that Chris developed to dead, knowing that we'll never get back to that golden era of the RollerCoaster Tycoon franchise. In the same interview with Eurogamer in 2016, Chris mentioned that my pet project at the moment is an ambition to bring my old PC game, RollerCoaster Tycoon 2, to modern mobile and tablet platforms. Not an easy task, given that the original game was written in low-level x86 assembler code, which only works on the PC. But with the success of Transport Tycoon on mobile, and with the experience and willingness of the small team from Origin 8 to continue working for me, it was looking a lot more feasible. So they're working with me to create a very faithful conversion of the original PC game. It was a great sense of relief for the many fans who still played the original games. And in December 2016, the game released to the App Store and Google Play and collates both of the original RollerCoaster Tycoon games and their expansions, without any unnecessary microtransactions. Called RollerCoaster Tycoon Classic, it focuses solely on the first two games, but also introduces modern controls and features, while also expanding the campaign to over 100 levels. It expanded to more platforms as it released to Steam in 2017 and on the Nintendo Switch in 2024, and is often credited as being the main successor of Chris's years of development. If you're interested in reliving the original RollerCoaster Tycoon games, I highly recommend these versions. They're not perfect, but they are Chris's vision for the series. And then, that's it. We've hit another barricade within the franchise. Atari continues to release games that they've just slapped the RollerCoaster Tycoon name onto, hoping that their previous reputation won't play effect, or that people who like the original games will continue to buy them. Atari has just left the franchise to be a cash grab now, nothing to keep the fans excited or hoping for future releases. Now, we're at the end of the situation that Atari put themselves in. They've been sued twice in regards to the RollerCoaster Tycoon franchise, surprisingly survived a bankruptcy, and they're still releasing games. Well, depends if you define cash grabs as games. All the way back to 1999, Chris's ideas started a franchise that ended up getting dragged through the mud due to Atari's handling of the series, as Chris continues to stay disconnected from the franchise, but still has hope that Atari will develop a solid entry. Frontier developed a series of games called Thrillsville, as I mentioned before. They also created their own Tycoon franchise called Planet Coaster, often defined as a true sequel to RollerCoaster Tycoon, that took what RollerCoaster Tycoon built and expands the creativity, bringing it into the modern generation to relive the RollerCoaster Tycoon fantasy and memories. When RollerCoaster Tycoon 3 disappeared from digital stores, fans hoped that we'll get a remastered version with better textures, more polygons, and modern features. But for now, the complete edition will suffice, now that it also supports 1920 by 1080 screens. As we continue to hope for the next major release that it's treated with care, as Atari should have learned their lesson by now. Well, we hope they have. I'll leave you with a quote from a reviewer by the name of Antal Booker, summarising the recent releases. The RollerCoaster Tycoon name may have been tarnished by more recent releases. I'm looking at you, RollerCoaster Tycoon 4, RollerCoaster Tycoon World, and RollerCoaster Tycoon Adventures. But Planet Coaster seems to be the true successor of the RollerCoaster Tycoon series, as Atari just can't be trusted to put out good games using the IP anymore.